I should have known something was wrong when my fiancé started obsessing over another woman's car. I'm Drew, 31, a CPA at a mid-sized accounting firm in Phoenix, and I thought I had everything figured out with Kimberly, my 28-year-old marketing analyst fiancé. We'd been together for 2 years, engaged for 6 months, and I genuinely believed we shared the same values about building a stable future together. That illusion shattered completely at Jessica's housewarming party last month in suburban Phoenix. Jessica was one of Kimberly's college friends who'd married this guy Colin about 3 years ago, and they just bought this beautiful house in Scottsdale with a 3-car garage, granite countertops, and a backyard pool that overlooked the desert mountains. I was actually impressed by their place, tastefully decorated with modern furniture, located in a gated community, exactly the kind of home Kimberly and I had talked about wanting someday after we'd saved enough for a proper down payment. But the moment we walked into that pristine garage and saw Jessica's brand new metallic silver Porsche Cayenne with temporary tags still attached, something shifted in Kimberly's entire demeanor like a switch had been flipped. She spent the next hour and 15 minutes circling that luxury SUV like it was some kind of religious artifact, taking photos from every possible angle with her phone, running her manicured hands along the cream leather interior, opening every compartment and drawer, asking Jessica increasingly detailed questions about the monthly payments, insurance premiums, maintenance packages, and financing terms. I watched my future wife transform into someone I didn't recognize, gushing about how incredibly lucky Jessica was to have a husband who obviously knew how to treat his wife properly and understood what real commitment looked like in practical terms. The way she emphasized properly made my stomach twist with unease, like there was some unspoken standard of masculine provision I was failing to meet that I didn't even know existed until that exact moment. During the uncomfortable 40-minute drive home through Phoenix traffic in my reliable 2019 Honda Accord with 47,000 miles and excellent maintenance records, Kimberly launched into this detailed point-by-point comparison between Colin and me, explaining with increasing enthusiasm how he clearly understood that successful men demonstrate their love through tangible investments in their wives' happiness and lifestyle. She went on extensively about his apparent success in commercial real estate development, his obvious generosity with expensive surprise gifts, his willingness to prioritize making Jessica feel genuinely special and valued, and how the Porsche represented exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture that separated real husbands from guys who just talked about commitment without backing it up financially. I tried multiple times to redirect our conversation toward the things I thought actually mattered: our upcoming spring wedding with 150 guests, my recent promotion to senior associate at the accounting firm with a 12% salary increase, the $85,000 down payment I'd methodically saved over 3 years for our future house purchase. But she kept circling back to that damn Porsche and what it symbolically represented about Colin's genuine dedication to his marriage vows and Jessica's worth as a woman. The following 2 weeks became an endless, exhausting parade of not-so-subtle hints about weekend spa retreats to Sedona with couples massages, designer handbags she'd noticed other marketing analysts' wives carrying to client dinners, luxury vacation packages to Hawaii she'd researched online, and how I seriously needed to step up my game if I wanted to prove I was genuinely serious about our relationship and capable of being the kind of husband she deserved. Every single conversation we had somehow managed to circle back to detailed examples of other husbands who really loved their wives properly, and what that authentic love looked like in concrete, measurable terms that apparently involved significantly more money than I was currently investing in romantic gestures, surprise gifts, and lifestyle upgrades. The turning point came when we had dinner with another couple from our social circle who mentioned their financial advisor's recommendations about prenuptial agreements before major investments like house purchases or luxury vehicles. Kimberly immediately scoffed at the entire concept, launching into this passionate speech about how prenups were fundamentally unromantic, deeply suspicious, and completely inappropriate for modern marriages built on genuine trust and mutual commitment. She explained with conviction how real couples who truly loved each other never needed legal protection because they approached marriage as a complete partnership where everything belonged to both people equally, and suggested that anyone who wanted a prenup obviously had serious trust issues or was planning for divorce before they even got married. Her reaction was so strong and immediate that I found myself genuinely curious about what Colin's actual financial situation looked like beyond the surface-level luxury purchases that had impressed Kimberly so dramatically. The next day during my lunch break, I decided to do some discreet research and reached out to Colin through LinkedIn, sending him a casual message about potentially connecting over drinks since we'd met at Jessica's party and had some mutual professional interests in business and investing. He responded within a few hours with surprising enthusiasm, suggesting we meet that Thursday evening at an upscale sports bar near his office in downtown Phoenix. What I discovered during our 2-hour conversation completely changed my understanding of his relationship with Jessica and the financial dynamics that made their lifestyle possible. Colin turned out to be remarkably straightforward about his family's wealth management strategies, explaining that he'd inherited a substantial trust fund from his grandfather's successful manufacturing business, along with a diversified investment portfolio that had been professionally managed by his family's financial firm for over 2 decades. The Porsche, the house, the expensive vacations Jessica posted about on Instagram, all of that was funded by inherited money, not Colin's personal income from his commercial real estate job. But here was the crucial detail that Kimberly had never bothered to investigate. Colin's family's wealth management firm had insisted on an ironclad prenuptial agreement before any major purchases or financial commitments that might affect the trust fund's principal or long-term growth strategy. The prenup protected not just his inherited assets, but also outlined specific terms for lifestyle expenses, discretionary spending limits, and even provisions for how luxury purchases would be handled if their marriage ever ended. Colin admitted with a laugh that Jessica had initially been furious about the prenup requirement, but his family's attorneys and financial advisors had made it absolutely clear that no legal protection meant no access to the trust fund's income stream that funded their comfortable lifestyle. The irony was perfect. Kimberly had been praising Colin as the ideal husband who knew how to provide properly for his wife, when in reality he'd protected his assets through the exact same legal mechanism she'd just condemned as unromantic and suspicious. This revelation gave me a strategic idea that felt both brilliant and completely justified. If Kimberly wanted me to follow Colin's generous approach to marriage, then I should adopt his complete financial model, not just the visible spending patterns that had impressed her so much at the housewarming party. The following weekend, when Kimberly brought up the subject of luxury vehicles again and suggested I should really consider buying her something comparable to Jessica's Porsche to properly demonstrate my commitment to our upcoming marriage, I responded with genuine enthusiasm that clearly caught her completely off guard. I told her she was absolutely right about following Colin's successful approach to providing for his wife, and that I'd been thinking seriously about adopting his complete financial strategy rather than just admiring it from a distance like some kind of amateur. Her eyes lit up with excitement and relief, probably thinking she'd finally gotten through to me about stepping up my game and showing her the kind of love she deserved through tangible investments in her happiness and lifestyle. But her excitement transformed into horror and disbelief when I explained that following Colin's approach entirely meant we'd also need to get a comprehensive prenuptial agreement exactly like his family had required before any major purchases or luxury commitments. I watched her face cycle through confusion, anger, and then pure outrage as I calmly explained that Colin's wealth management firm had insisted on legal asset protection before funding Jessica's Porsche, and that any responsible financial advisor would recommend the same approach for us before I started making similar investments in luxury vehicles or lifestyle upgrades. She immediately accused me of being paranoid, manipulative, and fundamentally untrustworthy, demanding to know when I'd become so suspicious about our relationship and why I was suddenly treating her like some kind of gold digger who might take advantage of my generosity. The argument escalated quickly as she insisted that my suggestion proved I didn't really love her and was looking for excuses to avoid making the kind of financial commitments that demonstrated genuine partnership and long-term dedication. She stormed out of my downtown condo that evening, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, and spent the next 3 days at her sister's apartment sending me increasingly angry text messages about how disappointed and hurt she was by my sudden change in attitude toward our relationship. The messages ranged from accusations that I was using legal manipulation to avoid treating her properly, to threats that she was reconsidering our entire engagement if I couldn't trust her enough to share my assets without requiring legal protection. I spent those 3 days researching family wealth attorneys in Phoenix and finally scheduled a consultation with Margaret Stevens, a partner at a prestigious firm that specialized in asset protection for high-net-worth individuals and business owners. When I explained my situation during our initial meeting, Margaret actually laughed out loud and told me it was one of the most reasonable requests she'd encountered in years, particularly for someone in my financial position with substantial assets acquired before the relationship. She drafted a standard asset protection agreement that covered my $425,000 downtown condo with mountain views that I'd purchased 2 years before meeting Kimberly, my retirement accounts worth approximately $180,000 from years of disciplined saving and employer matching contributions, my stock portfolio valued at $95,000 that I'd built through careful research and systematic investing, and various other investments I'd accumulated through years of living below my means and prioritizing long-term financial security over immediate gratification. The prenup was straightforward and fair, protecting assets I'd built independently while ensuring that anything we acquired together during marriage would be shared equally, exactly the kind of balanced approach that any reasonable person should appreciate. What happened next was like watching a carefully orchestrated military campaign designed to break my resolve through emotional manipulation and family pressure tactics that I never could have anticipated. Kimberly's relatives launched a coordinated attack that started with her mother calling me at work to explain how selfish and paranoid I was being, demanding to know what kind of man requires legal protection before marrying the woman he claims to love with his whole heart. The conversation lasted 45 minutes and covered everything from my apparent trust issues to her daughter's heartbreak over discovering my true character after 2 years of believing I was different from other men who prioritized money over genuine emotional connection. Her older brother Marcus showed up at my CPA firm's parking garage on Wednesday evening, waiting by my Honda Accord to have what he called a man-to-man conversation about how I was treating his sister and whether I really understood the damage I was causing to someone who'd invested years of her life believing we were building something special together. The confrontation was uncomfortable but civil, mostly involving Marcus explaining that Kimberly had never asked for anything unreasonable and deserved better than someone who'd suddenly turned suspicious and controlling after she'd opened her heart completely to our relationship. The most annoying part was Kimberly's Aunt Patricia, who sent me daily emails with increasingly elaborate guilt-inducing messages about destroying family unity and breaking the hearts of everyone who'd been excited about our spring wedding and the beautiful future we'd all imagined together. Patricia's emails included detailed descriptions of wedding preparations already underway, deposits made on venues and catering services, invitations ordered with our names printed together, and how my sudden demands were forcing Kimberly to explain to extended family members that her fiancé had apparently developed serious commitment issues and trust problems that might derail everything they'd been planning for months. The situation reached peak absurdity when Kimberly organized a formal intervention at my downtown condo, bringing her parents, Marcus, Aunt Patricia, and 2 family friends who were supposed to help me understand how unreasonable my prenup demands were and convince me to return to the loving, trusting relationship we'd built over 2 years of genuine partnership. The intervention backfired spectacularly when I calmly explained Colin's identical prenup situation, pointing out the obvious double standard of praising one man as an ideal husband while condemning another for making exactly the same legal choices to protect assets acquired before marriage. I watched Kimberly's family members struggle to reconcile their criticism of my prenup with their admiration for Colin's generous lifestyle, particularly when I showed them screenshots of Jessica's social media posts gushing about her husband's wisdom and financial responsibility. The cognitive dissonance was almost amusing as they tried to argue that Colin's prenup was somehow different or more justified than mine, despite protecting identical categories of premarital assets through virtually identical legal mechanisms. Meanwhile, Kimberly's budget attorney from a strip mall practice attempted to negotiate modifications to my prenup, but struggled against Margaret Stevens' experience and expertise in family wealth protection law. The attorney clearly wasn't prepared for the level of detail and legal sophistication Margaret had built into our asset protection agreement, and several of his proposed modifications were either legally problematic or financially disadvantageous to both parties in ways he didn't seem to fully understand. Surprisingly, the one family member who actually supported my position was Kimberly's pragmatic father Robert, who privately approached me after the intervention to admit that he thought I was being completely reasonable and responsible about protecting assets I'd worked years to accumulate. Robert confided that he'd made similar financial mistakes in his first marriage by failing to protect premarital assets, and he respected my decision to learn from other people's experiences rather than repeating their costly errors. The real revelation came when Kimberly returned from what she called a strategic consultation with her sorority sisters from Arizona State, carrying a handwritten list of compromise demands that she presented as reasonable middle-ground solutions to our prenup disagreement. I sat in my downtown condo reading through her carefully itemized requests while she waited expectantly for my response, clearly believing she'd found a path forward that would satisfy both of our concerns about financial security and romantic trust. The list included immediate payoff of her $38,000 in student loan debt as an engagement gift to demonstrate my commitment to our shared financial future, guaranteed purchase of a luxury vehicle comparable to Jessica's Porsche within 18 months of our wedding date regardless of our combined income or budget constraints, complete removal of lifestyle maintenance clauses from the prenup that limited discretionary spending on designer clothes and expensive entertainment, establishment of a joint credit card account with a $25,000 limit for her personal use without requiring my approval for purchases, and automatic revision of the prenup after 5 years of marriage to include my premarital condo as shared marital property. She explained with obvious pride that her sorority sisters had helped her research what successful women typically negotiated in prenuptial agreements, and that these demands represented exactly the kind of balanced compromise that demonstrated both partners were serious about building wealth together while maintaining individual autonomy and mutual respect. I realized while reading through her list that Kimberly had completely missed the fundamental point of asset protection and was instead treating our prenup negotiation as an opportunity to secure access to my financial resources while contributing absolutely nothing equivalent in return. Her demands weren't compromises, they were ultimatums designed to give her immediate access to my money while eliminating the legal protections that made such generosity financially reasonable and sustainable for both of us. The student loan payoff alone represented almost 4 months of my take-home salary, and the luxury vehicle commitment would add another $800 monthly payment to our household expenses for the next 5 years, effectively doubling our transportation costs while providing zero practical benefit beyond social status signaling. When I asked what she planned to contribute to these financial goals beyond her $42,000 annual salary from the marketing agency, she became defensive and angry, insisting that her contributions to our relationship couldn't be measured in purely monetary terms and that real partnerships involved supporting each other's dreams and aspirations rather than keeping detailed scorecards of who paid for what. The coffee shop confrontation where she presented her final ultimatum revealed the manipulative behavior patterns I'd been unconsciously overlooking for months, as she threatened to postpone our spring wedding indefinitely unless I proved my love through these specific financial gestures that would demonstrate my genuine commitment to treating her with the respect and generosity she deserved as my future wife. I watched her face change from confident negotiation to barely controlled rage when I calmly declined her demands and explained that real compromise involved mutual sacrifice and shared responsibility, not one partner funding the other's lifestyle while assuming all the financial risk and legal exposure. She accused me of being controlling, emotionally withholding, and fundamentally incapable of the kind of generous love that successful marriages required, storming out of the coffee shop after declaring that I'd forced her to choose between money and marriage, and that any man who truly loved her would never put her in such an impossible position. The nuclear option deployment came when both sets of parents arrived for what Kimberly had arranged as a mediation weekend designed to resolve our prenup disagreement through calm family discussion and reasonable compromise that would satisfy everyone's concerns about our future financial security and marital harmony. What actually happened was a hostile negotiation session that felt more like a corporate merger gone wrong, with Kimberly's family presenting an even worse counterproposal that demanded I provide access to my premarital downtown condo if we planned to live there together, plus establishment of a $60,000 education fund for future children that would be controlled entirely by Kimberly and funded exclusively through my savings and investment accounts. Her mother had apparently consulted with a different attorney who suggested that Arizona's community property laws might give Kimberly claims to appreciation on my condo's value during our marriage, and that any reasonable prenup should acknowledge her contributions to maintaining and improving the property through her presence and domestic labor. The absurdity reached peak levels when her Aunt Patricia suggested that my insistence on asset protection proved I was planning for divorce rather than approaching marriage with the complete faith and commitment that lasting relationships required, and that Kimberly deserved guarantees about her financial security if she was going to sacrifice her independence and career advancement opportunities to become my wife. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, Kimberly had secretly contacted our spring wedding venue attempting to postpone our May celebration without consulting me about the potential financial implications or scheduling conflicts with vendors we'd already contracted. I discovered her deception when the wedding coordinator called my office asking for clarification about conflicting instructions, forcing me to immediately intervene with all our vendors to protect the $8,500 in deposits we'd already paid for catering, photography, flowers, and venue rental. The venue coordinator explained that postponement at this stage would mean forfeiting our deposits entirely, and rescheduling for next year would require new contracts at significantly higher rates, potentially adding $15,000 to our total wedding costs while eliminating the seasonal discounts we'd negotiated for spring pricing. Her extended family members escalated their pressure campaign by initiating workplace harassment designed to embarrass me professionally and force my compliance with their demands, starting with her Uncle Raymond visiting my accounting firm's reception area to loudly discuss my character defects with anyone who would listen. Raymond spent 40 minutes in our lobby explaining to other clients and colleagues how I was financially manipulating his niece and demonstrating the kind of controlling behavior that destroyed marriages before they even began, forcing my supervisor to ask him to leave and requiring an uncomfortable conversation about keeping personal matters separate from professional responsibilities. Her cousin Jennifer launched a social media campaign with increasingly dramatic posts about selfish men who used legal manipulation to avoid genuine commitment, including thinly veiled references to our situation that were obvious to anyone familiar with our relationship dynamics. The posts attracted dozens of comments from their extended network criticizing my character and questioning what kind of man prioritizes money over love, creating uncomfortable situations with mutual friends who began asking pointed questions about our wedding plans and relationship status. The final confrontation occurred during a tense family dinner at my condo where I firmly rejected all their proposed compromises and modifications, explaining that any agreement requiring me to fund Kimberly's lifestyle while eliminating legal protections for assets I'd worked years to accumulate was fundamentally unfair and financially unsustainable regardless of how many family members supported her position or how many emotional appeals they made about love and trust. After 3 weeks of complete radio silence from Kimberly and her entire family network, I made the decision that should have been obvious from the beginning and systematically canceled all our wedding arrangements with the methodical precision that had made me successful as a CPA. The financial damage was significant but manageable. I lost $12,500 in various deposits, including $4,200 for the venue cancellation fee since we were within the 90-day penalty period, $2,800 for photography services that couldn't be rescheduled to other couples on such short notice, $1,900 for catering deposits that the company kept as compensation for ingredients already ordered and prep work completed, $1,400 for flower arrangements that had been specially ordered from suppliers in California and couldn't be returned, and $2,200 for miscellaneous vendor fees including the string quartet that had blocked our date, transportation services, and specialty linens that had been reserved exclusively for our May celebration. However, canceling everything immediately saved me from the remaining $23,000 balance that would have been due over the next 6 weeks, including final catering payments for 150 guests at $85 per person, premium bar service with top-shelf liquor selections, the elaborate 3-tier wedding cake with custom sugar flowers that Kimberly had insisted on ordering from Phoenix's most expensive bakery, and the photographer's remaining fees for 8 hours of ceremony and reception coverage plus engagement photos and digital gallery access. The financial analysis was straightforward and comforting. Losing $12,500 now was infinitely better than paying $35,500 total for a wedding that would legally bind me to someone who saw our marriage as primarily a wealth transfer mechanism rather than an equal partnership between two adults who respected each other's financial contributions and personal autonomy. Margaret Stevens handled the legal complications with characteristic efficiency and barely concealed amusement, particularly when Kimberly's strip mall attorney sent an angry demand letter requiring immediate return of the $16,200 engagement ring and threatening litigation if I didn't comply within 72 hours of receiving their formal notice. Margaret's response was a masterpiece of legal precision that I kept a copy of for future entertainment, citing Arizona's conditional gift precedents dating back to 1987 that clearly established engagement rings as property contingent on the completion of marriage, and noting that Kimberly's refusal to sign a reasonable prenup without unreasonable financial demands constituted breach of the implied conditions that made the ring transfer legally valid under state law. The budget attorney's threats evaporated immediately when Margaret included detailed case law showing that Arizona courts consistently ruled in favor of the purchaser when engagements ended due to the recipient's unreasonable demands, refusal to proceed with marriage plans, or attempts to extract financial concessions that fundamentally altered the nature of the proposed partnership, particularly in situations involving significant financial disagreements about premarital asset protection and lifestyle expectations. Margaret also noted with obvious satisfaction that any litigation attempt would likely result in counterclaims for the costs I'd incurred due to Kimberly's family's harassment campaign and her secret attempts to manipulate our wedding planning without my knowledge or consent. I changed my downtown condo's smart locks and security system codes after Margaret advised me to document any attempts at unauthorized entry, especially given the hostile and increasingly erratic behavior that Kimberly's family had demonstrated throughout our prenup negotiations and the workplace harassment they'd initiated against my professional reputation. The precaution proved wise and somewhat entertaining when my doorbell camera system recorded 3 separate attempts by Kimberly to enter my condo using her old access codes, including one particularly dramatic instance at 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday where she spent 15 minutes trying different number combinations, pressing the intercom button repeatedly, and finally leaving a series of increasingly angry voicemails on my phone about being locked out of what she still considered her rightful home. The footage provided excellent documentation of her continued sense of entitlement to my property and living space even after our engagement had officially ended and she'd moved her belongings back to her sister's apartment, reinforcing my decision to protect my assets through legal means rather than trusting someone who clearly believed she had permanent claims on resources she'd never contributed to acquiring or maintaining. The security camera also captured her attempting to look through windows and trying the balcony door, behavior that Margaret advised could constitute criminal trespassing if it continued and that I should report to Phoenix police if Kimberly made any further unauthorized attempts to access my property. The engagement ring sale through Morrison Jewelers, a reputable establishment in Scottsdale that specialized in estate and resale jewelry, recovered $13,800 of my original $16,200 investment after their standard 15% commission for authentication, cleaning, and resale services. The recovery amount nearly covered the $12,500 I'd lost in wedding deposits while protecting my $425,000 in premarital assets that Kimberly had been so eager to access through marriage, creating a financial outcome that was almost poetic in its balance. The irony wasn't lost on me that the ring sale proceeds almost exactly matched my wedding cancellation costs, creating a financial wash that left me in essentially the same position I'd been in before meeting Kimberly 2 years earlier, except significantly wiser about the importance of asset protection and infinitely more skilled at recognizing the warning signs of financial manipulation and entitlement in romantic relationships. 6 weeks after our final confrontation at the family dinner, Colin called me for drinks at the same upscale sports bar where he'd originally explained his family's prenup requirements and trust fund management strategies, and our conversation revealed information that made Kimberly's behavior even more absurd and self-defeating in retrospect. Colin admitted with surprising candor that his prenup had actually saved his marriage during a rough patch the previous year when Jessica had briefly considered divorce after a major argument about her spending habits and his family's financial oversight of their joint decisions about luxury purchases and vacation planning. The legal protection and clear financial boundaries had given both of them security and structure that encouraged commitment rather than creating the resentment, manipulation, and power struggles that Kimberly's family had predicted would destroy our relationship if I insisted on asset protection. Jessica had eventually come to appreciate the prenup's clarity about financial responsibilities, asset ownership, and spending limits, realizing that the agreement protected both of their long-term interests and prevented the kind of bitter financial disputes and asset battles that destroy so many marriages and make divorces unnecessarily expensive and emotionally devastating for both parties. Colin explained that the prenup had actually strengthened their marriage by eliminating financial uncertainty and creating clear, mutually understood expectations about earning, spending, saving, and long-term financial planning that both partners could accept and work within without constant negotiation or resentment. He also revealed some fascinating details about Jessica's evolution on the prenup issue, noting that she had initially been furious and hurt about the requirement just like Kimberly, but had gradually recognized that the agreement gave her financial security and independence rather than limiting her options or treating her as untrustworthy. Jessica now actively recommended prenups to other couples in their social circle, particularly women who had their own careers and assets to protect, because she understood that legal clarity prevented manipulation and exploitation from either partner. Most interesting was Colin's revelation that Jessica had privately expressed concern about Kimberly's materialistic focus and entitled attitude during their college friendship, noting that Kimberly had always seemed more interested in other people's possessions, lifestyle choices, and financial status than building her own career advancement or financial independence through hard work and professional development. This explained why Kimberly had been so fixated on the Porsche and its symbolic meaning rather than asking practical questions about how Colin and Jessica had actually structured their financial partnership, divided household expenses, or planned for long-term goals like retirement savings and property investments. Our mutual friends gradually learned the truth about our breakup through natural social dynamics rather than any deliberate campaign or reputation management on my part, and their reactions were uniformly supportive once they understood the actual facts and timeline rather than the victim narrative that Kimberly had initially promoted through selective disclosure of our prenup disagreement and careful omission of her unreasonable financial demands. Several friends admitted they'd been increasingly uncomfortable with Kimberly's obvious materialism during our relationship and her tendency to evaluate other people's romantic partnerships based on visible spending patterns, luxury purchases, and lifestyle displays rather than genuine compatibility, emotional connection, or shared values about building a life together. The consensus among our social circle was that I dodged a significant bullet and demonstrated mature financial responsibility by refusing to compromise on asset protection just to satisfy someone who clearly viewed marriage as primarily an economic opportunity and wealth acquisition strategy rather than a romantic partnership between equals who contributed fairly to their shared future. Most revealing was the feedback from other couples in our friend group who privately shared their own prenup experiences and universally recommended the legal protection I'd insisted on, particularly the women who'd initially criticized my position during Kimberly's family intervention but later admitted they'd want similar agreements if they'd accumulated significant assets before marriage or had concerns about protecting inheritances, business interests, or retirement savings from potential future disputes. 3 months after our final breakup, I heard through mutual friends that Kimberly had begun dating a divorced pharmaceutical sales representative named Trevor who was apparently much more willing to fund her lifestyle preferences without requiring legal protection, mutual financial contribution, or even basic discussions about long-term financial compatibility and planning strategies. The relationship followed a predictable pattern according to Jessica, who remained friends with Kimberly despite growing concerns about her friend's approach to romantic partnerships and her obvious pattern of seeking men primarily for their income potential rather than emotional compatibility or shared life goals. Trevor had quickly found himself paying for Kimberly's accumulated credit card debt from previous shopping sprees, upgrading her entire wardrobe for business networking events and social occasions, covering expensive restaurant bills at trendy establishments she insisted on visiting for her Instagram presence, and funding elaborate weekend trips to Sedona, San Diego, and Las Vegas that aligned with her social media image goals rather than any shared interests, hobbies, or genuine relationship building activities that would strengthen their emotional connection. The situation became even more interesting when I learned through Colin that Trevor had been married before and lost significant assets in his previous divorce precisely because he hadn't protected his premarital wealth through legal agreements, making his willingness to repeat exactly the same financial mistakes with Kimberly either remarkably optimistic about her character or completely naive about the potential consequences of funding someone else's lifestyle without legal protection. Jessica mentioned during a casual conversation that Kimberly had already begun pressuring Trevor about engagement timelines and making pointed comments about other couples who'd moved faster toward marriage and financial commitment, suggesting she'd learned absolutely nothing from our experience about the importance of building genuine partnership, mutual respect, and financial compatibility before making legal commitments that could affect both parties' long-term financial security and personal independence. Meanwhile, my own life improved dramatically without the constant financial pressure, emotional manipulation, and entitled demands that had characterized the final months of our relationship, and I found myself genuinely grateful that Kimberly's unreasonable demands and her family's hostile behavior had revealed her true character before we'd made the catastrophic mistake of getting married without adequate legal protection for the assets I'd worked so hard to accumulate through years of disciplined saving and careful investment planning.